Our show is about bringing the best practices in education to inspire, connect, and empower all educators by providing practical tips that can be used in the everyday school setting.
Hello and welcome to Coach Me If You Can. I am your host, Kristie Wurglitz. I have Stacy Colgan here with me as well. And today we're going to speak about continuing to grow as an educator with William Parker, who is the author of the book, Pause, Breathe, and Flourish. I am an NSSEO district coach, and my background is in teaching special education.
And I'm Stacy Colgan, the professional learning coordinator at NSSEO, and my background's in social work.
William Parker is the founder of Principal Matters. He's an educator, an author, and a speaker who uses his expertise in school culture, leadership, and communication to equip educators with solutions and strategies for motivating students, inspiring teachers, and also reaching those communities.
He's also the author of several insightful books. And today we're going to be talking about his newest one, Pause, Breathe, and Flourish, Living Your Best Life as an Educator.
Hi, Will, and thanks for joining us today on the Coach Me If You Can podcast.
Hi, Kristie. Hi, Stacy.
Hello.
I jumped in before you finished your last line there.
That's okay.
That's okay. We are so incredibly excited to have you here with us today. Could you take some time to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you decided to write this book?
I will be glad to. First of all, thank you guys for the opportunity to sit in this room with you, Kristie and Stacy. And listeners may not know that Sami is available too, because he's making sure our technology sounds really great. So I'm just so happy and jealous that you guys have such a great setup for your podcast. My background, I was a high school English teacher starting back in 1993 in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, which is just south of Tulsa. I was a language arts, creative writing, mythology, AP language department chair, all those areas of teaching for 11 years before I stepped into school administration in 2004 in another school just south of Tulsa with 1,400 high school kiddos. And then in 2006, I had the opportunity to transition to a school just north of Tulsa, Skiatook High School, which is a school that's actually in two counties, Tulsa County and Osage County. And any listeners out there who might be familiar with a pioneer woman who in our area is popular for her great cooking. She lives in Osage County, but also there's a new movie that Leonardo DiCaprio is filming right now in Osage County called Killers of the Flower Moon, which is all about the history of the Osage Nation and some unbelievable and riveting stories that took place back in the 1920s during that time. And so if anybody's unfamiliar with where I live, then please check out that new movie that's coming out. But my students were part of the Osage Nation culture. 32% of our kids, approximately each year, classified as Native American. So we were one of only two schools in the state of Oklahoma that offered Osage as a foreign language. So it was a fun place to be a principal. My two oldest daughters graduated from there. And then in 2017, I transitioned to the role I'm doing now. I actually work with my state principals association, working, training, supporting principals. And then I also write books and do PD with teachers and principals all over the U.S. And so it is so fun to sit in this room with you two and just to catch up. And I hope I gave you enough background of the things I do.
Thank you so much for sharing with us a little bit about you. In our conversation today, what is one thing that you hope our listeners take away?
When you guys reached out to me and asked me to share about this new book, Pause, Breathe, Flourish, Living Your Best Life as an Educator, I was just thinking about how often I talk to educators across my state and across the U.S. who struggle with that work-life balance. Yeah. And really, I would just like to say to anyone who's listening right now that it's important to avoid the perfection trap. There really is no way to have perfect work-life balance. But what I like to do is take time to encourage people to reflect. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book in 2006 or 7, somewhere around there in my second or third year of being an admin. I came home late one night to help put the kids to bed. My wife and I had 4 small children at the time, and I was just living on adrenaline, every day getting up super early, working through lunches, staying late for student activities, getting home with barely enough time to help with the children, and then opening my laptop and working late into the night and starting my next day as early as possible, doing the same thing. And I was avoiding exercising, eating good nutrition. I was avoiding time with developing friendship, all those things that are the other parts of your life that you should be taking time for. I was sacrificing because I wanted to be the best educator that I could be for my school. And I'll never forget the night my wife sat down with me and just said, can we have a short conversation? And so I shut my laptop because I was in the middle of working. And she said, well, you have become a shell of the man that you used to be. The kids and I have decided that you are a husband and a dad on the weekends only. And the rest of the time, the school owns you.
Wow.
And it was so honest. And she said it without bitterness or resentment, just simple resignation. And when she went to bed that night, I opened my laptop up again. And instead of working, I wrote a letter of resignation. And in that letter, I wrote a letter to my superintendent and board explaining that if things didn't change, I was going to need to change positions at the end of the school year so that I could take better care of the school and my family and myself. And I took that letter to school and I put it in a folder and I set it on the corner of my desk. And I made a decision. I told myself I'm either going to begin to rediscover the practices to cultivate some better habits in my own life so that I can take care of the school and myself and my family, or I'm going to hand this letter in at the end of the school year. And so I didn't discover a silver bullet that day, but what I discovered was a new mindset where I knew stepping into work each day that I had to keep it in perspective with the rest of my life. And so I just want to really encourage listeners, as you're listening to this right now, you may be that person who's had that same moment, that same crisis moment. You may have had somebody who's been willing to hold you accountable and have that kind of conversation. You may have had that moment where you realize that you have stopped taking care of yourself. And I'll finish this question with this analogy. When I fly in an airplane and I listen to the flight attendants talk about if this cabin loses pressure, an oxygen mask will drop down. Place it on yourself first before you place it on the person beside you. That analogy was what resonated with me as I thought about my wife's honest conversation with me. I was no longer breathing. I was trying to place the oxygen mask on everybody else and completely forgetting about self-care. And so I just really want to encourage educators that it is okay to give yourself permission to reflect, to pause, and to reflect on those other areas of your life that need to be cultivated so that you can stay inspired to serve kids.
Yeah. And what better time than at the beginning of the year to kind of think through what are the things that the educators that are listening today, what are the things that you would recommend that they set up in order to have some of that work-life balance, whether it's even in the classroom while they're there, but also what are the things that if they don't have a wife that can honestly say like, ugh, we need a little bit more from you, how can they make that realization for themselves?
That's a great question. In the book, I unpack 10 areas that I think are just important for reflection. And so I'll be glad at the end of this session to point listeners to a free resource because I have a free study guide that goes along with the book that just provides all kinds of reflective questions that people can be asking on those 10 areas. And they include things like your body, your mind, your friendships, your resources, your future, your legacy. And I won't go through the whole list, but I'm just going to pick one from that list for just a moment for an encouragement for listeners. And that would be to first begin with your mindset. In other words, ask yourself the question each day, am I present when I step into my work in a way that's bringing positivity and adding to the room that I'm in or the students that I'm with each day? Because I think mindset often gives you the opportunity to rethink about the way you see your school. And one of the best ways to do that is to put yourself into the skin of kids or families, whoever it is that you're serving, and try to put yourself on the other side of yourself for a little bit. John Gordon has a great book called The Energy Bus. And in that book, he talks about the positivity that you can add to a conversation, or he also calls it the negativity. He says, don't be what he calls an energy vampire. Yes. The person who's constantly sucking the life out of every conversation or every situation or trying to find the worst case scenario that you could possibly labor into. Because although we need to be realists and we need to be frank and we need to be honest and all those invulnerable and transparent and all those things we need are important, but we also need to make sure that the influence that we have when we step into a room is leaving people better than we found them. And so I think that mindset, it takes time to practice that because sometimes it's hard to get on the other side of us. But I think sometimes it's important to give yourself that opportunity to think about what kind of influence am I having And am I aware as I'm stepping into school of the things that are happening around me other than just my to-do list? Because so often we're so self-focused that we often forget to look outside of our own stresses and see what's going on around us.
And we'll put a link to Energy Bus. We have a NSSEO celebration committee, and they are actually reading that book together this year.
It's a great
Thank
book.
you.
Yeah. I love how you talk a lot about cultivating those better habits and really bringing in that positivity. And we know that sometimes when our educators aren't able to do that, that really does impact the school culture. And we know that having that school culture is not just for staff, but it impacts our students, and everyone contributes to that. So it's our students, our staff, our administrative, everyone contributes to having that positive school culture. Can you talk a little bit about how schools and districts can create a positive school culture right off of the bat, especially for maybe some of those educators who don't really have those leadership roles?
For sure. And you've probably figured out that I'm a storyteller. So let me step into this. Let me step into this suggestion with a story. My mom and dad live in West Tennessee, where I grew up. And so believe it or not, I was a farm kid who moved to Oklahoma to go to school and stayed in this part of the country. But every time I have an opportunity to head back to West Tennessee, I do it. When we were small, Dad would put a telescope outside the farmhouse, and we would look at the stars, the constellations, the moon at night. It was so beautiful when you're that far away from light noise and even the craters of the moon. And any teachers who are listening or educators who have been science teachers might already know this, but you can only see one face of the moon at any time, wherever you are on the planet, whether you're in North America or if you go to China, because of the way that the moon orbits around the Earth. That face of the moon is consistently all we can see. And the only way you can get to see the other side of the moon is if you become an astronaut, or if maybe you look through a satellite image. And so I'm giving you that analogy to just let teachers know this. You have the opportunity as an educator to see more sides of the moon of your school than almost anyone else. You are like an astronaut who gets to orbit into your planet or your moon or your school every single day. And you get to see kids in ways that others don't. You get to see activities that others don't have the privilege to see. You get to see learning happening in ways that are unique, that others don't have that opportunity. Parents would love to be able to see through your eyes what's happening with their kids throughout school. And here's the mistake we make. We fail to recognize that the rest of the world needs to know what's happening on that side of the moon. So sometimes there's amazing things happening and we're just not telling anybody. We assume they know, but we're not telling them. We're not taking photos or putting it in our newsletters or capturing those moments or retelling those stories or celebrating that child's moment of wonder and curiosity that's happening. And so if I could just encourage educators together to begin to figure out ways that you can harness and highlight and capture those amazing things happening in your school. If we collectively were sharing out those wonderful moments with our communities, then the perceptions that they have about our schools might be different. Because here's what I've discovered. In an absence of information, people make up a narrative. And often they make up negative ones because that's just human nature. So why do we allow them to make up the narratives of our schools when we have access to what's happening there? And so there's lots of ways you can do that, whether that's harnessing and leveraging your social media access, whether it's taking ideas and capturing down little notes to yourself. I used to do this. I'd write down kudos, things I saw kids or teachers doing. And then I would send out a kudos email to all my staff and say, kudos, here's some 5 or 6 things I just saw happening today in the school that are so exciting. Or I would capture those stories throughout the week from coaches or teachers or activity sponsors and place them in a newsletter at the end of the week to share out with my families so that they could see what's happening in schools, but encourage teachers to do the same thing. So together, you're collectively giving your community access to your side of the moon. So that's I know that's a very practical way to respond to that question, and it may be more than you ask, but I like to keep that image in mind, that you have the privilege and the responsibility to share what's happening in your schools.
Yeah, I love that. And just thinking about the positives and not dwelling on those negatives and really broadcasting it and sharing it with not just people in your school, but even your community too.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So tell us about some of your healthy habits. What are some good hacks that we can take from you? Bonus points if you tell us about your morning routine, because I always love hearing about what people do in the morning.
Well, let me tell you one of the things I started doing after the crisis that I had in my career because I was no longer exercising. I had gained a lot of weight. I was skipping lunches, or when I did eat lunch, it wasn't healthy. And so here's a couple of hacks. And this is what works for me. So any listeners, you know what works for you. What is it that you can do that brings you energy and joy and inspiration? For you, it may be something different than for me. But for me, I've always enjoyed running and being active. And that was something that I had stopped doing. And so what I started doing was setting out my shoes and running clothes the night before, so that the first thing I got up in the morning and saw was an opportunity to be active. And I just created a track near my home that was going to be easy for me to access and do, because it was the easiest thing I could do and still have time to get ready and head to school. So I made it a goal when I got up in the morning to ignore work so that I could take a moment for some inspiration and then take some moment for some activity. And so that's become a habit that I've done for years now. And so now I alternate it. I have an every other day habit when it comes to morning routines and activities. But that's become something that's been a consistent way for me to stay active. But it's also been a place for me to problem solve. What I discovered was when I stepped down and began those morning activities and that morning jog around my neighborhood, a lot of the things that were weighing on my mind about school or maybe relationships or maybe some conflict that needed to be resolved, I would find myself being able to discover possible solutions better, right, as I was just working out. And so sometimes just that endorphin release that happens, that ability to kind of break away from the work itself, give your body an opportunity to do something different, it actually gave me like space to be able to problem solve. So that's just one morning hack. Another one I tried to commit to was trying to take time, especially in busy school schedules, to eat lunch with colleagues, to just take time to gather somebody around me who I could talk to and celebrate life with and catch up with. So it wasn't just powering through work like we so often are tempted to do. And then a third hack was accountability. I reached out to another colleague on my team that I was staying too late at work, and she had a young family too. So she would stop by my office on her way out, and she would just poke her head in the office and say, "Hey, Will, remember your family's more important than the school, so leave soon." And just that little touch of accountability would prompt me out the door earlier than I had been before, so that I could make sure that those were priorities. So those are just a few. There's a lot more that I explore in the book, and I'm sure you guys could add to that. But those are a few of my life hacks.
Thank you. Those are great.
Thank you so much for all of your insight. So many takeaways from today. If I had to choose some, I think some of my main takeaways are really looking at that accountability, looking at bringing in and celebrating the positive with your school and with your community. But I also really like how you talked about just pausing and reflecting. That oxygen, you can't help students and you can't help everybody else until you really take care of yourself. Stacy, how about you?
Yeah, gosh, so many. I love the eating lunch with colleagues. Lunch in our professional learning department is very important. We oftentimes will all order food together, and it's kind of a big deal. So I love that one. I also like the accountability partner. And Kristie, of all people, is one that has really helped us with even making a checklist for the end of the day. So we are literally checking out for the day and like leaving work at work and kind of checking in with that. I think that the third takeaway for me, I mean, there's lots more, but the third I think is I love the being really cognizant about mindset as I'm moving into different space. And I love when I step into work, I really want to be present and I really want to be adding my value and my positivity into the space. So those are some of my takeaways.
So many. It was really hard to pick some. Thank you.
It was.
So moving on to our final question before we get into some of our rapid fire questions. Will, what is something that really empowers, inspires, or connects you?
That's a great question. And there's a lot of things that inspire me. But I just want to add a practice that has been good for me. For those of you that are listening, let me just encourage you right now to pause for a moment and do this practice with me, because this might be something that would be helpful for you. Because I actually often will engage other leaders in these statements as a way for like intentional self-reflection. So there's 4 statements that I like to ask, and I like to rank myself on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being little or no time spent on this focus, to 5 being a lot of time spent on this focus. So if you're listening to this and you want to do just a quick little self-reflection to intentionally pause and reflect, then here are 4 statements. and give yourself a rank from 1 to 5. Statement number 1, I have been present, visible, and active with those I serve, whether that's in your school, your district, wherever that is. So where would you rank yourself on that from a scale from 1 to 5? Statement number 2, I have been meditating, listening, reading, or reflecting on helpful books or lessons. So how would you rank yourself on a scale from 1 to 5 in terms of what you're putting in your mind? Because you know what you put in your mind comes into your heart and eventually comes out to your actions.
Absolutely.
Statement 3, I have been making healthy choices in my sleep, nutrition, and exercise. That's an intentional reflection on how am I doing in terms of taking care of myself so that I can take care of others. And statement 4, I have been faithful to my loved ones with my time and attention. And that's one of those questions that always hits home for me because I get so excited about work when I'm at work, but making sure that I'm also being aware of the people I love. Because you know what, at the end of my life and yours, we're not going to care how many emails we answered. We're definitely going to care that we gave time and attention to the people who meant the most to us. So I find a lot of inspiration by just reflecting on statements like that and giving myself permission to pause and to breathe so that I can flourish. So I encourage you to use that as a tool for your own self-reflection.
I love that.
Me too.
I can even see it like in our monthly meetings.
Yes.
Spending some time talking about these.
Even just starting with that to really get us in the right mindset to talk about everything. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Rapid fire.
Yeah.
Let's do some rapid fire.
So now we're going to get into our rapid fire questions. So just share the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
What is something new that you have recently learned?
Okay. Can I say 2?
Yes.
Something new that I've recently learned that's been helpful is that the Spanish flu actually took about 3 years to make its course globally because of all the different variants and all of the different mitigation standards around the world. And so that's actually been helpful for me for context to remember in the middle of what we're going through as schools right now. We need to have a long-term commitment to our relationships because everyone wants this thing to stop and everyone wants a quick solution. And in reality, history has taught us that there usually aren't quick solutions. We need to be committed to good science. We need to do all the things we can for mitigations. And you need to be vaccinated if you haven't been already because the science says you should be. And if you don't agree with me, then just please ask your doctor.
Get vaccinated.
And, yes. But we also need to be committed to patience and endurance and determination with our communities to love and forgive people when they don't understand or they don't agree with us, because this is not something that we probably are going to see a quick solution to. And I was hopeful stepping into this year that we would, but it's obvious that we still have a long way to go. The second thing that's funnier is that yesterday when I was watching the news on Afghanistan's situation, which is so sad, I did not know that Gorbachev was still alive until he made a comment to the press. And I was like, I'm old enough to remember when he was meeting with Ronald Reagan. So surprise to me, Gorbachev is still out there and he's still making statements about world events.
Interesting.
Who was your favorite teacher or educator growing up?
Rita Owens was my 8th grade English teacher. She was a German American who had moved to West Tennessee. I still don't know why she moved to West Tennessee because she was one of these people who was outside the culture but moved in and became such a beloved part of our community. And it was in 8th grade when she pulled me aside one day and said, "Well, you have become a good writer. I think you should look at taking advanced English next year in high school." And little did she know that she was inspiring me toward the career that I would later have. So whenever I get an opportunity to have a platform like this, I just love that question when it comes up because I love to give a shout out to Miss Owen, who is no longer with us. She's deceased, but what a special person she was.
Shout out to Ms. Owen.
For sure. Absolutely. What book are you currently reading? Or if you're currently writing a book, we'd love to hear about that too.
First, I'm usually reading several books at a time, but this is one I picked up recently that I actually just began called 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager, Making the Most of Your Conversations and Connections by Kara Powell and Brad Griffin. And what I love about this book, it's for parents and teachers and anybody who loves to work with kids. And really what this book does is it just unpacks how important it is for students to understand identity, belonging, and purpose. Who am I? Where do I fit? And what difference can I make? Those are the questions kids are asking. And they do a ton of research with young people across the U.S. to pull together just some great suggestions for those who love to work with kids.
I'm going to have to check that out. We'll put that in the show notes too.
And I'm not currently working on a book, but I keep having suggestions. In fact, my own children have been asking me recently to write a memoir. Ooh. And I keep telling them, nobody would read that. and because I've written 3 other books, and my kids told me, well, Dad, if you wrote a memoir, we might actually read that one.
Oh,
which means they haven't read anything I've written before. So I have been tinkering with an outline and writing a little introduction into that story. So I'll keep you posted if I ever get.
Yeah, you'll have to.
Please do.
Best advice you have for educators?
The best advice I would have for you guys as you especially as we're stepping into a new school year, is give yourself permission to love your students. There is nothing as liberating as an educator. You've got to be firm and fair and consistent and prepared, and you've got to be committed to pedagogy and classroom management and the balance of both the science and the art of teaching. But at the end of the day, the energy and the joy that comes with education is when you give yourself permission to just really enjoy and celebrate those kids in front of you. So I think something happened when I became a parent. There's a shift that happened in my heart. I always loved my students, but there's something that happened as a parent where I had a hard time separating those two worlds, because I began to see my students through the eyes of their parents too. Yeah. And then eventually I began to see the things about them that probably irritated me more as a younger teacher, but as I got older, I found endearing. And I just think it's important for us as educators, if we're going to stay inspired in the work, is to embrace those things about your kids that could irritate you, and instead look for the humor, look for the things about them that you cherish, look for those unique differences that each of them have. But by giving yourself permission to admire your kids and love them, I think it inspires you to teach them differently.
I love that, because I think kids know. My daughter is getting ready to go back to school tomorrow. She's going to be a 5th grader, and she constantly talks about how excited she is to go back to 5th grade because they are looping her 4th grade teacher who she loved into 5th grade. And then in the next breath, she'll be like, and I know that I'm not going to have my 1st grade teacher, who I'm not going to name, because, and I'd be like, what was the difference between the 2 teachers? And she was like, my 1st grade teacher didn't like me. She just didn't like me.
Our students know. They pick up on that. Yes.
Right. They're very intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'll tell a quick story just to be vulnerable. But my very first year of teaching, I learned that lesson the hard way. I remember having a young freshman in one of my classes who he was just always getting in trouble and pushing the envelope. And one day I finally just called his mother because I had run out of ideas and I was just griping, about whatever Tommy was doing in my class. And finally, she just listened politely, and she said at the very end, this is before I was a parent, she said, Mr. Parker, I just have a quick question. And I said, what is it? And she goes, do you like Tommy? Oh, what a great question. Because she put her finger right on my heart. Yeah. And I lied and was like, oh, yeah, for sure I do. And then later I just sat down with an older educator in my building, and I reflected with him, and because I felt injured, and he just was so encouraging and instructive. He was just like, Will, let me just encourage you to reframe the way you talk to parents. Stop calling their kids a problem and talk about the challenges that you're both facing. Make sure you first identify the things about the student that you admire before you jump into the conflicts that you're having. And bring those parents in as partners with you, because they want to see those kids be successful, and they know if they're a knucklehead. And so work together for the same goal, because they love their kids. And if they don't think you do, it's not going to be easy for them to cooperate with you in correcting them. And that was such a great conversation for a veteran to have with a young teacher. And it changed me. I stepped into those next conversations thinking about that perspective. What do I need? It's what does the kid need?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And going back to your book, where you say how important it is for us to come into work and have these positive relationships. Same with kids. They need to have these positive relationships with us, with each other.
Right. And partnering with parents to have that as well. It's a big deal. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story and being vulnerable with us. Again, for those of you that don't know, Pause, Breathe, and Flourish is a fantastic book, and you should definitely check it out. For those that do want to check it out, how can they find you, Will? How can they find your book?
Oh, there's so many ways we can connect. First of all, if you want to look at any of my resources, I've been collecting resources. I've got a podcast for education leaders with almost 260 episodes. And
Wow.
all of that content is free on my website, which is my name, William D as in David Parker, WilliamDParker.com. Or if they're just looking specifically for Pause, Breathe, Flourish, they can go to Amazon and find it there, or any of the other books that I've written. So yeah, but if you want to connect with me, I would love to make this a continuing conversation. So if, especially any education leaders out there who want to have some free resources, I put out a podcast every single week for education leaders just to encourage the work that they're doing.
Great.
So thank you guys for this opportunity. And I'd just love to stay connected with your work too.
And tell us the name of your podcast one more time.
It's called Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast with William D. Parker.
Perfect. We're going to link all of this. We're going to link your book. We're going to put it all on our show notes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you again so much. We can't thank you enough for just taking the time to talk with us and share insights in your book. We had such a great time today.
Well, Kristie and Stacy, I had a great time too. So thank you guys for the work that you're doing and the way that you're encouraging educators across the U.S. and happy new school year.
Yeah. Happy 21-22.
Yep. Hopefully
Thank
a better
you.
year.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into today's podcast with William Parker. Join us next week for another exciting episode on the Coach Me If You Can podcast.